Welcome to the Protect the World podcast. My name's Brody, and I run a photography and storytelling page called Brody Hopkins Media. As part of that, I also run a project called Protect the World. But we'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to talk about the general philosophy behind what I do, what gets me out of bed every morning. I find the world to be endlessly enthralling, and it fills me with this kind of restless curiosity. I want to explore every little nook and cranny of it. The whole thing is just awe-inspiring. And then you throw in the improbability of it all. Like, there are more stars in the known universe than grains of sand on all of the world's beaches. And we're existing here for a fleeting moment on this tiny fucking rock that's inhabited by an unfathomably diverse and beautiful web of interconnected species and ecosystems. And then there's people, Homo sapiens, those 8 billion monkeys that have somehow managed to take over the planet. Each of them with a million different ideas and aspirations and stories. There's a lot of room for improvement for humans as a collective, but as individuals, they're just the best, aren't they? But then there's the flip side, the bits that make me want to stay in bed. For me, there are two key challenges that we're facing right now. The first is inequality. We live in a world where the richest 1% receive almost 2/3 of all new wealth that is created. 1% of the global population receiving nearly twice as much as the remaining 99%. Currently, the richest 81 people alone hold more wealth than the bottom 50% of humanity. That's 81 people with more money than 4 billion people. And this is happening in a world where more than 10% of the global population doesn't have enough food to eat. It is utter insanity, and it makes me fucking furious. And then we turn to our other big challenge, biodiversity loss. In the last 50 years, wildlife populations have declined by 69% on average. The rate of extinction is up to 1,000 times higher than the pre-human era. And around half the world's remaining wilderness areas have been lost in the last 100 years. Our best and worst trait as a species is our ability to push past limits. It's what allowed us to walk on the moon, to cure a plethora of diseases, and to be able to communicate instantly with someone on the other side of the planet. But it's also the driver behind war, climate change, and this catastrophic crisis of overconsumption that we find ourselves in right now. If we're ever going to actually become the intelligent creatures that we claim to be, we need to do a much better job at deciding which boundaries we should be pushing past and which ones we should be embracing. We need to learn to ethically manage our population, resource consumption, and land use in order to create a better life not just for humanity, but also for the uncountable number of other living organisms that we share this planet with. So that brings me back to Protect the World. For the last 6 months, while exploring Latin America, I decided to visit a different not-for-profit organization every month. My goal was to spend some time with them, learn about what they're trying to achieve, interview the founder or director, and then put together a short documentary film about the organization. In doing this, I was able to visit some spectacular locations, from the dense jungles of the Peruvian Amazon to the stunning coastlines of Costa Rica's Osa Peninsula. But I also met a ton of inspiring people, tackling a range of critically important issues. Take Bethany King, the music teacher turned aid worker who started her own NGO on the front lines of the Venezuelan refugee crisis. Or Michael Ewens, the grieving father who's dedicated the last 14 years of his life to fighting extreme poverty in the highlands of Guatemala. These are people doing amazing work with not enough resources, and their stories deserve to be told. My long-term goal is to do exactly that, to be able to travel and spread the word about people and organizations who are making the world a better place. Unfortunately, though, I'm not in a position to be able to travel indefinitely just yet. I'm currently working at a biological station in the Peruvian Amazon, saving up so that I can hit the road again and visit more NGOs next year, hopefully in Africa or Southeast Asia. But I don't want that to stop me from sharing stories, and that's where this podcast comes in. Going forward, my goal will be the same. Connect with a different NGO every month, learn about the issues they're tackling, interview their director, and share their story. But the podcast format will hopefully allow me to connect with some harder to reach places on the planet, and also put more focus on the people behind the organizations. I'm interested in the kinds of humans who decide to engage in not-for-profit work. What motivates them, and what can they teach us about living a fulfilling and purposeful life? The final thing I want to talk about in this introductory episode is money. And for that, I want to tell you a story. When I was at university, I received a scholarship. This scholarship was tied to a mentoring program which paired university students with secondary school students from underrepresented backgrounds, with the goal of reducing inequality in Australia's higher education system. The money was great. It freed up time so that I could be a mentor for some really amazing kids, instead of working yet another boring part-time job to pay the bills. But the thing that really changed my trajectory was meeting the donor behind the scholarship, a woman by the name of Betty Amsden. One evening, at a small event in Melbourne, 89-year-old Betty gave a short presentation about her life and the lessons she'd learned along the way. The focal point of the presentation was a piece of advice that her parents gave her when she was just 5 years old. If you have 2 pennies, give one away. This was back when Australia still had pennies. In theory, this was a simple piece of advice, but it proved challenging for Betty in practice when she was in line at the tuck shop the following day. She'd been given some pocket money to buy a few treats and was admiring the assortment of delicacies when she noticed another young girl standing next to her who didn't have any money. With a bit of hesitation, Betty decided to heed her parents' advice, giving the girl half her pocket money to spend, and then the two of them sat down to share their treats together. That girl ended up becoming one of Betty's lifelong friends, and the experience solidified that small piece of advice into a personal philosophy. Betty went on to accumulate a small fortune from a chain of nursing homes that she founded, and eventually turned that small fortune into a rather large one through some wise investments. The entire time, she always maintained her philosophy. If she had 2 pennies, she'd give one away. But Betty wasn't just generous with her money. She was also generous with a far more valuable resource: time. Betty was someone who always showed up. Every event, every fundraiser, Betty was front and center, seizing every possible opportunity to connect with and learn from others. She was a philanthropist in the true sense of the word, someone who loved people. Betty passed away a few short months after I met her that night, and I decided to go to her funeral at the Arts Centre in Melbourne. It was here that I saw the true impact of Betty's unique outlook. There were thousands of people from all walks of life who had all been touched by Betty's generosity in one way or another. It was clear that her donations had made a positive impact, but her real legacy would ultimately lie in the ripple effect from her ideas. The scores of people who would decide to live their lives a little differently after being inspired by Betty. It's worth mentioning that giving away 50% of your money isn't always possible. If you're living close to the poverty line, please don't do that. But a more realistic goal is giving away half your disposable income. Add up your essential expenses: food, rent, transport, etc., and then try to split the remainder between yourself and others. And don't start with half. Start with 10 or 5% or even just a few dollars, but pay close attention to the impact of your donation. Remember that if you earn over $20,000 a year, you're in the top 10% worldwide in terms of income. Over 60,000, and you're in the top 1%. I guarantee you that if you donate wisely, you can make a remarkable impact. So, why am I telling you all of this? Well, I don't just want to share the stories of amazing organizations. I want to contribute to their work as well. And that's where you come in. I run a Patreon where people can support this project, and it's based on Betty's philosophy. Half the money helps me to keep traveling and telling the stories of more incredible NGOs, and the other half is donated directly to those NGOs every month, with full transparency on where the money is going. So if you're looking for a good place to start giving, you might consider signing up via the link in the show notes for as little as $5 a month. Personally, as long as I have a camera in my hand, food on my plate, and a roof over my head, I'm happy. And honestly, half the time, I don't even need the roof. If I can get the Patreon to the point where my basic needs are met plus a little extra for a rainy day, then everything on top of that will be given away. I have no interest in accumulating wealth. But there are lots of other ways you can support this project too. You can follow along on social media, share the podcast with your friends and family, or leave a review. And you can also let me know about any impressive organizations you're aware of that are tackling inequality or biodiversity loss in one way or another. They can be big or small, well-established or just starting out, and they can be located anywhere on the planet. If you know of a not-for-profit that's making the world a better place, I want to know about it. The first real episode of the Protect the World podcast will be out very soon, so be sure to subscribe now so that you're the first to know about it when it's released. A big thank you to everyone who already supports this project, and I hope you find the people and organizations featured on it as inspiring as I do.